Now, how could one possibly top a forensic psychiatrist that has testified in the Unabomber trial, in the Jeffrey Dahmer trial, in the Andrea Yates trial, and the Casey Anthony trial? Well, the Commonwealth for the Lindsay Clancy trial sure tried, because today the defense rests and there was a rebuttal witness called from the state. Before we get to today, day 18, let's jump to yesterday because there was just one witness, and it was Lindsay Clancy's chaplain. Now, she was the one assigned just days after the incident and was one of the first people to speak with her once she was awake and alert. So she actually went to visit Lindsay before Lindsay could speak or say anything, and she was able to pray for her children. So when she went to visit Lindsay, when her and Lindsay had her first conversation, the first thing that came out of Lindsay's mouth was, "I'm so glad that my children are safe." Now, do we think that because she realizes that her children are in heaven, or is she saying that because she's still in a psychotic state and thinks that her children were unharmed? Because shortly after, she did allude that she heard a loud male voice telling her to harm the kids so that she could harm herself. So the chaplain testifies that Lindsay talks about her kids every day and carries immense grief. However, on cross-examination, the Commonwealth gets up and said, "Were you aware that Lindsay, shortly after the incident, was exercising with a yellow exercise band? And did you know shortly after the incident, she was filling out forms to apply for income?" The Commonwealth also asks, "Are you aware that Lindsay talks about the recent support that she's gotten, and she says that it is deserved?" Okay, now this is when I start to nerd out this next witness. So this is Dr. Resnick. Now, he has been a forensic psychiatrist for years. He did a lot of the studies as well as the articles on filicide. Now, if you don't know what filicide is, that basically means that it's a parent that harms or unalives their children. Now, he goes over that there are 5 types of filicide. Now, he testifies that Lindsay qualified for 2 out of the 5 types of filicide. The first one being altruistic filicide. Now, this kind is followed through out of an act of love in that person's mind instead of hostility. Because if you remember, Lindsay had said that she only wanted to harm her children because she wasn't going to be there anymore, and she would rather be with them in heaven than have them here without a mother. Another type of filicide that Lindsay qualifies for is more of a manic filicide, where you're just not in your right state of mind. You don't understand the morals or the consequences of what you are doing to that child. The other 3 categories would be child malnutritment, if that child is unwanted and you do it for self-gain. And the third is when you hate your spouse so much that you do it out of revenge. Dr. Resnick testified that on the days of the crime, she scored 7 out of 9 on the depression scale, saying that she was severely depressed as well as had some signs of manic episodes. Therefore, he diagnosed her with bipolar 2 with severe depression. Then he's asked to describe what auditory hallucinations are, and he says some are benign while others are pretty intense. Like 1 out of 3 usually are something like open the window, get a glass of water. Other ones that are more harmful are like harm yourself. So Resnick testified that Lindsay on that day was unable to conform to the law because she was just following the command of that demanding male voice. So Resnick said that Lindsay couldn't imagine a world that they existed without her. And at this point, the defense rests. Now, there's 3 rebuttal witnesses that we're going to hear from, and we heard from one that was also a forensic psychiatrist. And I'm not going to lie, it seemed like her attorney, Kevin, was very eager to cross-examine this witness. So we had Dr. Mack, okay, and he basically says the opposite of the other forensic psychiatrist by saying that she intentionally knew what she was doing that day because Lindsay, individually to each of her children, said, quote, "Go to God," in reference that she knew exactly where they were going to go. And not only that, but after she woke up and she said, "I'm so glad that my children are safe," but then also felt shame that she knew that what she had done in that moment was wrong. However, he did testify to her day-to-day in the mental facility that she's at, where she doesn't have any interest in personal hygiene, feels embarrassed when she has to shower because other people have to help her, talked about how she wasn't interested in like the physical therapy that they provided. He also testified that she was still quite depressed, as well as having SI thoughts. I forgot to mention too that he also thinks that Lindsay didn't portray any signs or symptoms of bipolar, and he also thinks that she should not have been diagnosed for a psychotic disorder on that day. The prosecution asks him, when did Lindsay start hearing this male voice? And he says, right after Patrick left. And he also talked about the phone call that Patrick made to Lindsay and insinuating that she was masking her even needing help. If she actually, was trying to get help and this wasn't her, then she would have stated it, but she was trying to cover up what she was doing. Another interesting part is that he says that Lindsay recalls inconsistencies of what was found. Like, for instance, she denies that she locked the door when indeed she did. And she also denies cutting the screen of the window, which Patrick testified that she did that. So Reddington gets up to cross-examine him, and he basically says, okay, where did you get this information about the events of that day? And he said, well, I got it from Lindsay. And so he said, okay, well, you're going to, take her word for it when she is on SI watch and that she had just come out of a coma. And he said, yeah. And Reddington just tries to poke holes in his experience by talking about how he works under somebody that was in like a long crime episode, but the episode actually never existed. And then he also works more just with like the youth and children when it comes to cannabis use and not so much postpartum women. He also evaluated Lindsay the same exact time that a different doctor that was on the prosecution team as well, even though they worked for separate companies. And Kevin asked if he thought that was appropriate, and the witness said yes. They then get into a debacle on exactly what it says in the DSM-5 about postpartum period and how the witness was saying that it was only possible for someone to go into postpartum psychosis if it was in the span of 4 weeks. But then in other articles and in other places within the DSM, it actually talks about how you can go into psychosis after having a baby up to a year. I think at one point too, the witness was just like rolling his eyes, and they were talking over each other a bunch. And so the judge was like, you know what, we're going to break for today. So it sounds like Monday we're going to go through the other two witnesses that are rebutting, and then we will have closing arguments. I'm thinking Tuesday. I don't think that Lindsay is going to testify, and I do not think that Patrick is coming back. What do you guys think?